Switched on IT is proudly brought to you by Oz Hosting, Cloud Made Easy.
Welcome to Switched on IT. I'm Barry. This is the show where we talk about everything IT. Some of you will have video content and blog posts and, well, hopefully lots of you do. There's a method of SEOing, search engine optimizing, your content for your blogs, including like video and audio podcasts and your written blogs. And today, Doug and Ray are going to talk about how to produce the kind of posts and how to go about putting content together so that it's SEO'd in a way that will drive people to your site and drive them to the major part of your content. Now, Doug and Ray are with us now. Good morning, Doug. Good morning, Ray.
Good morning, Barry.
Hello.
Doug, let's just go to you and talk. Let's talk a little bit about, I think Doug was in the pre-session, Ray was talking about pillar and cluster, I think. Let me just throw this over to you now, and let's talk about some of those things.
Sure. So in having a search engine strategy, marketing strategy for your website, what we were talking before we came into this today was just the importance of having a strategy for pillar content. And also attaching to that cluster content. And, well, I guess we can start this by talking about, what exactly is pillar content? What does it look like? How, significant it is? And what are the different sort of media channels where you might be using pillar content? And then we'll go in and take a deeper dive into how a cluster content strategy will support your pillar content as well. So, Ray, I guess the first question, cab off the rank, is tell us about what pillar content is.
Well, so I'll start with the idea that let's talk about what a traditional website structure looks like, the hierarchy of a normal website. So Doug, when you see websites, people come to Oz Hosting and they launch a website. What is the typical structure that you see a website take hierarchically?
Yeah, sure. Typically, we've got our main navigation buttons either running along the top of the top of the page. Sometimes you might have a few down the left-hand side as well, and then you might have running along the bottom some things like terms and conditions and support contacts and those sorts of things. So it's very much starting with the home page, and then you kind of drill down into sort of deeper content that probably relates to either your product set or the range of services you've got, that sort of thing. So it's arranged in that sort of tiered structure.
Exactly, Doug. And that makes a lot of sense for a website to be in a hierarchical organizational perspective. When someone shows up on a website, it makes total sense for them to be able to navigate the site in that logical progression of a navigation bar and then to navigate down and drill down into the pieces of the site that they want to visit. Well, that's not actually how Google and other search engines operate in terms of the way in which users actually find content. When a user does a search, it's looking for a narrow band of content. And when the user finds that content, it is taken deep into your website. It's not taken to your homepage almost 99% of the time. And so the concept of pillar and cluster strategy when it comes to SEO is taking advantage of that. So at the very basis is that you have a single piece of content that becomes the hub, and the cluster content are the spokes. And in essence, you're creating an individual piece of content, and you can create multiple pillars throughout your website. But those pieces of content are very rich. They're dense in some way, shape, or form. And they can be public or it can be private, but the idea is that it's going to establish some kind of consideration with the business, right? We go from awareness to consideration to conversion in terms of a marketing funnel. and a consideration people are paying you, presumably, right? So we want the pillar content to be in that consideration phase where it's turning someone who's a casual visitor to your website into somebody who is considering your business in some way, shape, or form, either to get more content so that you can do lead nurturing or in order to become a customer. So the idea of cluster content is to be that awareness tool. It's to create lots and lots of content that surrounds the pillar and draws people from the search engine in the most traditional sense in terms of a Google and the other search engines to the pillar content over time.
Okay, so the pillar content, that is where you want them to finish up. Now, if somebody is creating pillar content, and we were talking before about blogs and audio podcast content and also video content, can you tell us how significant should the pillar content, the hub, be? Should it be, for example, if it was a video, is it going to be sort of 5 or 10 minutes, or is it 35 minutes? If it's a blog post, is it a couple of pages, or is it a bit more of an essay? How do we sort of put a dimension, I guess, around our pillar content?
Traditionally, we think about it in terms of volume, depth, breadth of that particular content. Now, of course, we could have something very high value if you said, this piece of pillar content has the secret to life. It has the meaning of life in this, and it's 5 words. And people will be willing to convert for that answer, then that's your pillar content. But for the most part, they are traditionally longer pieces. So a piece of pillar content on a blog, on a website, will traditionally be anywhere from 2,500 to 4,500 words in length. And one example that I gave as we were talking beforehand was that you would take, say, a year's worth of blog posts and select among them, say, the top 10% of posts. So say if you have, you're blogging once a week over the course of a year, look at the 12 months of the year and select just one of each of those blog posts, and then determine of those 12, maybe the top 10 out of those 12, and then converting that, mashing them all together into a substantive, holistic piece that leads people to some kind of converting option. What's the call to action in the content that you want people to do, and making sure that it is high converting. That it means that it's of enough value for someone to want to give up their email address to make a purchase, even if it's a small purchase with you to get started. You need to get them to move off the threshold of being a consumer, that is just consuming your content, to being a purchaser, someone who is buying from you or giving up their email address so that you can do more lead nurture. So again, that's where that consideration and conversion process needs to be considered when it comes to your pillar content, and that's going to be really powerful over time. So you can do something as simple as long, deep content, but then, as we'll talk about when it comes to podcasting and video content, you can do some more flexible usage of the technology to be able to, of the strategy, that is, to be able to, engage people to this pillar content that's going to be useful to people as well as useful to the business.
Right. Okay, so it sounds like obviously the pillar content is a much deeper dive, be it a podcast, a video, or a blog, a written blog. So that's where we want the people to finish up. So if we were looking at blogs, for example, and then saying, okay, I'm going to now determine what cluster content we're going to create for that. Is the cluster content, how significant is that? How do you actually decide what is going to be your cluster content? And is the way to look at that, in a sense, should we be looking at that as though it's kind of like the little baited hook that is going to bring people into my main pillar content? Is that sort of the way to look at the function of the cluster content? So starting with the first question, with cluster content, how do we sort of define what our cluster content should be? And in terms of just how big it is. Is it a sort of a 20-minute video video content or podcast, or is it a little bit briefer than that? What are the sort of rules of thumb there that help us define our cluster content strategy and how significant it is?
Sure. So again, I tend to define things in terms of value. So for example, you might have cluster content of 300 to 600 words as a blog post and do those on an ongoing weekly basis. That seems to be a typical cadence that works well for most businesses, is a weekly post on their blog that then is highly distributed and promoted throughout social media and other channels. The idea then is that you are actually taking a step back before you even begin, and you say, what is my website about? And a lot of people actually think about their website being about their product or service. And I think that's the wrong approach. You have to step a level above the product or service that you're providing in the business, because in essence, people don't really care about your product until they care about your product. And what you need to be able to do is to make them aware that you exist, so that when they have the felt need or want for your product or service, or products or services, the felt need or want is met by an awareness of you, and that they can at least step into considering you over one of your competitors. That could be a competitor. It could be not having the solution, right? I have a felt need or want, but I don't know how to solve it, and or choosing a competitor to do that thing. So stepping above that, stepping above the fray of the products and service and competition, what is it that you can provide at the nexus of three things? One is your knowledge and expertise, what the market needs and wants, and where you can actually provide authenticity to that that level of entertainment, of engagement on that level. And so I think about it from those three perspectives. Those end up being the categories that the website should be about. It's what people are going to search to find your business in pursuit of learning about solving a problem. Because people buy things from anyone, because there is a problem. They're trying to solve a problem. They are trying to be entertained. They're trying to deal with some kind of difficulty that they're trying to overcome. Right? If I have a broken gutter, I'm going to go to Google and look for a company that provides gutters, maybe the product itself, or a service provider who is going to be able to fix my gutters. There's a problem, I'm trying to find the solution to it. Or I say, you know what, I'm really bored right now, which I can't imagine ever thinking, but if I was bored in the world, I would go to Google and I would say, entertain me. No, I'd say something like, like favorite videos or something like that. I would type in an interest, and then Google will then surface content that will help entertain me. So your content will be in that space to entertain me in the category that I'm looking for. So what we're trying to do is to establish these larger tiered thematic or categorical components to the website. Usually you have 2 or 3, not 10, not 20, probably usually 2 or 3. And you might create 1 to maybe 3 pillar pieces of content per each of those categories. So you're really talking about 6 to 9 pieces of pillar content across the entire lifespan of a business. And so think about from that level, like what's the most valuable thing you can provide to people that isn't giving away your product or service, that you can do in furtherance of them getting to consider you for your product or service. And that's the content you should create. Now, that might mean that you have 300 to 600 word blog posts, and then the pillar content becomes a series of audio podcasts that you've put together, and in exchange for you giving me your email address, I give you access to a zip file with those audio pieces of audio content in them for free. But in the audio content, now I'm going to, at length, educate you about the topic you've been reading about, right? The little niblets, the little nuggets of cluster content you've been browsing. Maybe you've only seen one piece of my cluster content, but now you've come to my pillar content, you've downloaded this audio, or you signed up for an email sequence where now you're going to get 4, 5, 6 emails from me. Each of them over the course of time is going to have an individual piece of audio content that's going to educate you a little bit more about this topic deeply. And then I'm going to ask you for a sale, or I'm going to ask you for some other call to action to make sure that I'm further identifying you as being an interested party. Maybe it's scheduling a initial consultation as that first next step from the pillar content to a conversion to business, and maybe a 15-minute free call where I can just answer your questions regarding the pillar content that you just consumed, right? So it's about staging people through this process and understanding that the pillar content is a mechanism for turning people from casual observers, from just consuming content on your website, to in some way, shape, or form acting on that content that they're receiving on the site.
Okay, and so when we're doing that, so we've got our pillar content, we've got our cluster content that supports each of the pillars, and we were talking about there being 3 different versions of it. It could be just a written blog, with images, perhaps, a very traditional approach. It could be audio podcast, or it could be a video content. In terms of how that is basically understood by the search engine, are they all of equal value? How does the search engine actually know, for example, my audio podcast, how does it actually know the words that I'm using, or do I have to use, as we do with a regular website where I've got an image, I might put in some alt text, which actually tells, in a sense, the search engine, this is what this image is about, so that it then knows if there's some value in it for somebody that's searching, for that subject matter or not.
Hi, I'm Neil from CGD Group, and we do printing with imagination. Our products and imaging have that wow factor. Whether it be business cards, flyers, the Coffee Gazette, or our brand new A5 video folders and animation. Have your business branding remembered. Call us today on 4639 5553. CGD Group, printing with imagination.
Power FM is total entertainment. From the morning drive with Fiona and Jeff to the drive home with Jeff Black. On the weekends, catch the Crazy Kevin Show, Dennis Mitchell's Breakfast with the Beatles, the Semi-Pro Sports Show, and Racing Nation with James O'Shea, plus the music you grew up with. Keep your radio dial locked on Toowoomba's Power FM, celebrating 10 years. You'll find us at 88.0 on the FM dial or online at www.powerfmradio.com.au.
Oz Hosting is proud to support Switched On IT in bringing practical help to Australian businesses. We're talking to literally hundreds of businesses every day about their IT services, how to make them more efficient, how to make their businesses more efficient, and how to protect their valuable data. If you'd like your IT services securely hosted right here in Australia and expertly managed, talk to Oz Hosting.
Mind, Body, Soul with Perth-based international speaker and influencer Gwenda Smith. Every week we explore the world of business and personal development with an exciting new format with some of the world's leading experts on productivity, mindfulness, sales success, personal development and more every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Only on ptvchannel0.com or the PTV Channel O app. PTV Channel O. Discover a whole new world of entertainment.
So how does the search engine know what's in my video and what's in my podcast?
Yeah, so you actually bring up a really good point, an exception to the rule, and it's always good to have exceptions to all of these various strategies. But photo blogs exist. There are blogs that are focused on telling a story through imagery. And while I don't use it typically as an example when we talk about cluster and pillar content, because it really doesn't lend well to that format, think about an infographic. An infographic is usually a fairly involved piece of content, and it's highly shareable. So many times people think, well, that's going to be my pillar content because I'm going to want to drive people to my infographic, and then all of my little cluster content is going to build up to it. And it turns out that actually infographics, if you're going to create one, you're going to spend the time to do all the research, design all of this information, and then put it into a visual space where you've hired a designer maybe, or you've spent some time with a tool that creates infographics to create it. It's not really useful as pillar content. It's really good actually as awareness content that you can use on social media, because infographics tend to be content that is highly shared. It's frequently very well shared, and that propagates more traffic back to the website. So you might use that as feeder content to some other traffic strategy, but not usually really good for pillar and cluster content strategy. So we have to think about how we use some of these media in order to effectively bring people to our website to do what we want. So infographics are really great and useful, just not in a pillar and cluster perspective. To your point, though, which is that when we look at, say, audio in a podcast format is traditionally for the human. It's for the ears, not for Google and the other search engines. But they have been growing up. They have been getting smart. And so Google and Apple Podcasts, which is still the largest podcast directory out there, but many of them have actually started to transcribe all of the audio that is actually being pushed through the podcast feed. So now Google is actually capable of identifying what is being said in those podcasts to surface podcast episodes to Google searchers in the search engine results pages. So now today, like if you type in, give you example, Productivity Cast, you will see my podcast in the feed literally when you do a Google search result. It shows multiple of the episodes, usually 2 or 3 episodes, right there below the actual web page for the podcast. So you can just click on that and start listening to the podcast from the Google search result page. That's because Google has tied the podcast to it. Even further from, more to the point, is that you can actually type into the search engine, say, a title of one of the podcasts, and Google will surface that podcast episode, that individual podcast episode, to listen to, because it knows what you're looking for. And you can just type in, say, the title of the podcast episode plus podcast. And then all of a sudden, you'll have an audio interface to click and play the audio directly in the search engine results page. You don't have to go anywhere else. You can listen to it right there on Google. The power of this is that, to what you're talking about, is how do you properly optimize cluster and pillar content for that? In that strategy, what we're really doing is we're identifying the podcast episodes as the cluster, right? You're typically going to have an episodic podcast, meaning that you're just going to put episodes out on a regular basis, whether that's daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, or otherwise. It's just you're putting episodes out and they're going to be streamed out on a regular basis, as opposed to a serial podcast, which has series, and so you maybe have season 1, season 2, season 3 typically associated with that kind of podcast. So the episodic podcast, you're going to then say, okay, on my business website, what's the pillar content going to be? So maybe we decide that the pillar content is a webinar. And in the audio, maybe it's an evergreen webinar, right? I record it once, I put it into an evergreen webinar tool, and now it's just going to keep playing. People can register for it and listen to it on the evergreen webinar schedule. So in essence, what I'm going to do now is, in the podcast, for the human listening, because I don't care about Google, for the human listening, when I get to, say, the end of every episode, I'm going to say, hey, by the way, if you want to go more deeply into this topic, I've put together a webinar, and you can go check it out by going to mybusinessdomain.com/webinar2, webinar 3, whatever your webinar name is, right? But it's a special landing page, your pillar page, and that pillar page is going to be basically a sales page, a lead page that explains to people the value of watching this webinar. The webinar could be 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 3 hours, doesn't matter. It's about value. And so now you're taking me from being at this stage of the game where I'm listening to you and understanding the little bit. I mean, again, your podcast might be an hour long, but you might only be able to go into depth of a surface of a specific topic, especially if you're interviewing someone or otherwise. And so you get into your 20-minute, 30-minute, 45-minute podcast episode. At the end of each of those cluster episodes, all around the same category, you now bring someone to a webinar where they can actually go deep into that topic and you really explain that topic. Now you have their email address. Now you can start them down lead nurturing. You can bring them closer to conversion. So that's how we can use that kind of pillar and cluster in an audio capacity. And what it really does is it tells you the wheat from the chaff. right? The people who are listening to your podcast and the people who are just hearing it. Because there are a lot of people who are just hearing your podcast. They come, they listen to 5 minutes, maybe they listen to the whole thing, but they did it while their kids were screaming in the background. They were driving home from work and they got yelled at by their boss. All kinds of things are happening in people's lives, right? As I think it's Plato who said, everyone's fighting a harder battle on the inside. You never know what's going on inside someone's head until they act. And being able to put these kinds of pillar content on your website leads people from your podcast to your website and shows that they were listening. That's really, really powerful.
Right. Okay. So I think that's a really good guide, if you like, to help people generate, compelling content, really optimize their website for search engines. I'm just trying to think, with that sort of a strategy, you're going to have what's sort of the ratio between, or what's a rule of thumb that makes sense for a business operator? Should I have 10 pillars and 15 clusters per pillar, or how do I get the mix right so I'm not sort of writing an encyclopedia or trying to duplicate with Wikipedia or something like that? How do I sort of keep that, I guess, under control, and probably from the standpoint of just, the amount of effort required to produce all that content. What do you see as a sort of a common number of pillars and number of clusters per pillar, and is it okay just to have it mostly a blog, maybe with a little bit of podcast and a little bit of video, or can you just go nuts and just say, look, I'm just going to do it all video?
Yeah, so this is a really great example to use video in this particular case. So when it comes to video is traditionally, in at least the small business marketing space, the vast majority of video is uploaded to YouTube. So we'll just use that as an example. But YouTube needs to be considered a vehicle for both short form and long form content, but not necessarily for pillar content, because pillar content needs to live behind some level of paywall. You need to give up some kind of information to be able to access the ultimate piece of content that is there, especially when it comes to video content. So what you might do is take those videos that you're recording, say, on a weekly basis. So let's say that for most people, what I say is you're gonna do up, just to get started, as an experiment. Start with weekly cluster content and monthly pillar content. So you're thinking 3 areas that your website's going to be about, 4 pieces of content. And you can even rotate that, right? So if you have 3 categories, content pillar 1 is going to be about theme 1, pillar 2 is going to be about theme 2, pillar 3 is going to be about theme 3, and then you're going to repeat that 4 times throughout the year. So each month you're going to put out a different piece of content related to each of those categories. And then your cluster content each month is going to match up to that theme. So your cluster content week 1, 2, 3, and 4 is going to be associated with theme 1, and then in 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 5, 6, 7, 8, yeah, the next month, those 4 are going to be associated with theme 2, and so on and so forth. Okay, so you're in essence going to start out on that level. And then after the first year, you'll have created, in essence, 12 pieces of pillar content, and you'll be able to decide, are those pillar content pieces good enough? Are they converting? Do we need to do what's called conversion rate optimization on those pieces of pillar content? Do we need to restructure them? Then decide whether or not they need to be kept. Do you need to kill your darlings and create new, better pillar content? Maybe that page just isn't operating. Maybe people just don't care about that topic, and so therefore you can now double back, take that page offline, and then put something else better. You can even leave the pillar content there if you really want to, but really then double down your focus on better content. So back to the YouTube channel, you are going to decide to do, say, a weekly video, right? I'm going to do a weekly video. I'm going to put that video out, say it's 3-5 minutes long, and I'm going to take that video now, embed it on my website, write up a little blurb about it, and at the end of that written blurb, I'm going to direct people to the pillar content. That could be a free ebook, a free checklist, a PDF, whatever it might be, and that, what we would traditionally call a lead magnet, is now the thing that's going to capture people's information on that particular pillar page. Now I want to create a lot of them, so I need to be able to go ahead and establish those pieces and then bring people to it from creating all of these little cluster pieces. I might also say in the video, hey, by the way, I'm going to be doing this longer mastermind group. It's going to be a video mastermind, and it's going to be 3 hours long, and it's going to be on July 30th. So in my videos, I'm now engaging people to come to a live event that's going to be video based, because video people want more video, right? So it makes sense. Those shorter videos are going to be embedded on the website, but the idea here then is to bring people from one place to another and getting them to show interest, show that they are considering you for something, considering you for the interest in the business, interested in a product or service, interested in learning more so that you can do more lead nurturing. But we have to show that level of going from just a casual lurker, as we call them, lurking on at your just consuming content, to being someone who's actually interacting and engaging with you and giving you some kind of contact information in order to be able to do that.
Right, terrific. Okay, well, look, I think we've covered some incredible ground this morning. I think that we should all be going back now and defining what our pillars are going to be and our clusters, and let's go hard and create some great content.
Indeed.
What do you think, Barry? Further questions?
No, I don't have any further questions. I think this has been it's actually been an interesting insight for me personally, and I think that probably the truth is that lots of people won't have even thought about the sorts of things that you've been talking about today. So I think that the only thing, as I've been listening to you, the only thing that comes to mind is time. Seems like this is a very time-consuming process. Is that right, or have I overstepped the mark there?
No, I think that what we have to do is have a better understanding of how to create content, and we can actually talk about that next week, because I will model how folks should create content. Small business owners traditionally talk about the fact that they don't have enough time to create content, but it's actually the flip side, and so we'll talk about that next week.
All right, okay. Ray, your feed is breaking up a little bit, so it's probably a good thing we're at the end of this session. Thank you for your input today, Ray Sidney-Smith and Doug Endersbee. Thank you for your time today, Ray.
No problem.
And thank you, Doug.
Good on you, Barry.
That's the end of this session of Switched On IT. Now, if you have any questions about pillar and cluster content, or how to put a blog together, or anything like that, send us an email. The email address is feedback@ptvchannel.com, or connect with us on our social media. Here's a graphic with all of the social media contacts on it. You can also send us a message on our website through the contact form. If there's anything you would like to know, just send us a message, let us know. We'll pass it on to Doug and Ray, and they can deal with it in a future session. Don't forget also that every session of Switched On IT, and indeed any of our shows, is available for you to review on our video on demand. So just go down the left-hand side of the site and you will find everything there. And we will pick up the topic that Ray has suggested today next week. And in the meantime, take care, and we'll see you again next week.
When the going gets tough, advertising is a must. Thousands of potential customers make buying decisions every day based on advertising they've seen or heard on radio and television. Are you losing sales because potential customers don't know what you offer? Get your business, product or service in front of thousands of potential customers with a joint advertising package on Power FM and PTV Channel O. capture a multimedia audience with our affordable radio, TV media advertising package. Stay ahead of the pack by contacting Barry on 0431 390 920 or email feedback@ptvchannelo.com or Jeff@powerfmtoowoomba@gmail.com.